The Breakfast Rush if you missed it this morning.
As we remind you that South Africa continues to grapple with growing tensions around migration, unemployment and service delivery. But behind the political debate is a humanitarian crisis affecting hundreds of vulnerable people. For more than 2 months, over 400 refugees, including children, women, elderly people and those with chronic illnesses have reportedly been sleeping on the pavement outside the Department of Home Affairs office on Che Guevara Road in Durban after fleeing intimidation as well as violence. The Siyafana Sonke Action Campaign says these refugees are not asking for permanent housing but for emergency shelter and a safe, coordinated reintegration process. Joining us to provide clarity on the situation is Yeshelen Govender from the Siyafana Sonke Action Campaign. No stranger to the Breakfast Rush on Radio Al Ansar, and you might have seen him on your socials as well. Yeshelen, good morning to the Breakfast Rush.
Good morning, Nazmira.
As always, for making time for us.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
To begin, paint this visual picture for us, please. What is the current situation facing the refugees outside the Durban Home Affairs office, and how long have they been living under these conditions?
Okay, they've been living on that. I'm not going to use the word living, sorry. They've been sleeping on the pavements outside the refugee office on Che Guevara. It's now going to be the 9th week, right? So that would have been towards the 20th, 21st of May is when they first would have started sleeping on the pavements there. And the situation has not improved dramatically since then. There's a bit more of a consistent supply of food and water that's coming in. But in terms of shelter, we haven't made any improvements. Unfortunately, practically the only entity with access to shelter that can house a group of this size is the state. And the state hasn't actually been assisting us with the matter. So you've got 400 people on the pavements, and women and children are sleeping under very, very rudimentary shelter, which is made out of basically plastic sheeting. And some people sleep in their cars, and the rest of them are left out in the open.
So the issue at large, you've mentioned that this is now a humanitarian crisis. So it's not just a migration crisis.
It's moved beyond a migration crisis. I think that what we picked up using KwaZulu-Natal as a particular example is that when it comes to repatriating migrants, and we are talking about generally citizens that have come from Malawi and Zimbabwe, the state has set up repatriation sites, and they did it quite quickly, and they provided some level of support, right? With refugees, they haven't done the same. And I think part of the reason is that refugees will be staying in the country. They're not leaving the country. But what it's resulted in, and this is whether it's at a repatriation site or whether it's dealing with the refugees, is that you have ordinary civilian citizens. And we are talking about people, these are not criminals or very wealthy people, they're working class people. Some of them work as are leather workers, others make shoes, they're tailors, they're barbers and hairdressers. They're not wealthy people, and it's they live from month to month based on the resources that they can work and earn. And once you have a single disruption in their, I use the word income stream, then you have a humanitarian crisis. Because they've got no food, no shelter, there's no way of transporting themselves or their children around the place, and there's no access to medication. One of the consequences we're dealing with at the moment is that foreign nationals are being denied access to health facilities, right? There's not a lot of reporting that's happening in the news about it, but it's happening every day. They're being denied access to health facilities like hospitals and clinics. All of this gives rise to a situation where, when all these factors are combined, it looks like a situation where you're going to have disease spreading, where you're going to have children that are living out in the cold and unable to get an education. You're going to have men and women and children who don't have access to food security. Now, it sounds very much, and I've spoken about the situation in Gaza and Palestine, and This sounds like a smaller version of that. It's the same sort of suffering that we are seeing, that you have seen Palestinians going through in Gaza. And for me, that's a very painful thing, that it's actually our country that is this, where this is happening.
Your campaign says refugees are being used as political footballs. What do you mean by that? And how has the political rhetoric contributed to the current situation, Yeshelen?
Okay, look, the political footballs comment, I'll actually stand by that comment. With the refugees, and I'm going to stick to the issue of refugees because they're different from migrants, right? In this case here, the refugees on Che Guevara, they have protections within South Africa because they are all documented and registered with the Home Affairs. They are also registered with the UNHCR, which is the UN body overseeing refugees. Now, what this means is that they are entitled to certain legal protections, and more especially, they are entitled to constitutional rights, including the right to security, the right to human dignity, it's your right to food, all of those. And what we've seen from the state, and here it's going to be, when I say the state, I'm mentioning every political party who is a member of the state, right, or forms part of the government of national unity, as well as there's certain other groupings around the country who are not necessarily political parties. But it's an election year, and refugees do not have the right to vote. That is the one constitutional right that they do not have. And that is why we're seeing a certain lack of action around them, right? Because they do not vote, and therefore their needs can be laid aside. But I think a more dangerous aspect is that the reason why political parties feel as though that they can ignore the refugee and migrant issue is because it is not an issue that resonates at this point with what is called a voter base. Right? At the moment, the voter base, and especially here in KwaZulu-Natal, the voter base is very much comprised of people who subscribe to anti-migrant sentiments. Right? A lot of work will have to be done to change those sentiments and to actually direct the anger towards the rightful, what I would call the rightful direction, which would be the state and private sector, which basically is because you see, the protesters' anger is rightful. It deals with unemployment and wealth inequality and service delivery, but the migrant issue becomes a distraction from that. And I personally think that the state is quite happy, or the political parties within the government are quite happy that citizens are distracted with the migrant issue rather than dealing with the actual service delivery issues that the state is actually responsible for fixing.
Absolutely. Now, there are concerns that anti-migrant sentiment is becoming more organized and more visible. How serious is this trend, and what risks does it pose to social cohesion?
I think, okay, firstly, it is if there is a spread, and I do think that there is a spread of it, it's something that needs to be taken very seriously. It is something very dangerous, it is something very dangerous for social cohesion. And what I want to point out here is, and the reason why I'm saying it's so dangerous is that this movement, this anti-migrant movement, their goals are continuously shifting, right? They initially started off protesting against illegal migrants. Okay. The shift then moved on to all migrants. Then it started to include basically refugees and asylum seekers. And it's now at the point where it's basically an argument that every foreign national, African foreign national within South Africa should be out of the country. This is extremely dangerous because if you get rid of the entire migrant community within South Africa, that accounts for maybe just over 5% of our total population. Okay? If our unemployment rate is sitting above 32%, getting rid of just over 5% is going to leave a lot of people still unemployed and still unhappy. I'm just using the example of unemployment for one. So if that problem doesn't disappear when the migrants disappear, what happens then? Do you actually look at the root issue of the problem, or do you start to scapegoat another grouping afterwards? And our concern is that the trend is showing that the state or the political parties would rather scapegoat a vulnerable group than take responsibility for their own failings. And that's why I think that it's very dangerous that this is spreading. And I do think that if it stops spreading, we need to have more people speaking up, right? More ordinary people speaking up and contesting this. And we also need to demand accountability from the people who are supposed to be our leaders, because they should be out there making the strongest possible statements to calm things down, and they should be out there explaining what the real issues are and how they're going to actually resolve those issues.
Made it clear that your immediate request is for emergency accommodation rather than permanent housing. What practical solutions are you calling for right now, Yeshelen?
Practically, right? In terms of at this point here, the humanitarian issue is a priority. Okay, we have hundreds of people living on the street in winter, and like you correctly described how that group is comprised of. There's elderly people there's children, there's ill people with medical ailments, and the pressing concern is that they need shelter. And they've said and I want to make it quite clear, they aren't demanding free housing, and that's actually a false news that's being spread, that these refugees want free housing. They don't want free housing. They want temporary emergency accommodation, which can consist of being tents. It would be preferable if they had 4 walls and a roof over them, but they will be very happy if they just had tents and if they had security from the police to make sure that they're not being attacked. But those are the most immediate practical thing that can be done, is that the state can allocate a community ground or a community hall for these refugees to stay in.
In closing this morning, if government does not intervene urgently, what do you fear could happen in the upcoming weeks and months?
I think we've already seen a lot of it happening, and I would urge to anyone who's listening to this show, right? Don't make the mistake of thinking that we are all safe in our communities if you aren't having marches happening within your community at this point. Right now, we know that we are collecting reports from areas outside of Durban, which say that every day there are people going door to door and evicting foreign nationals. And every time there's an eviction, there's an assault that accompanies it. We are also getting reports from areas, or we have received reports from areas like Pietermaritzburg, where we know that there's at least 1 confirmed death from the 19th of June. Now we're going to see these things happening more and more often, because the issues giving rise to these protests are not going to disappear. We've got rhetoric that's coming out on social media, which is very aggressive and which is very confrontational and which is very escalatory. Okay, then we have, and this I have a particular concern about, is that in certain media outlets and in certain political parties, there's an active endorsing of xenophobic language and narratives. And that does nothing to dilute tension within the country, just inflames it, and it makes things dangerous for every other citizen in South Africa.
Agreed. Thank you for your time, Yeshelen Govender from the Siyafana Sonke Action Campaign. And also thank you for your humanitarian efforts that we see you put in every single day across the board. You are watched, you are appreciated, and you are valued.
Join us again on TBR.